PRiSM Future Music #2. Hopefully, if you're watching this, you're watching it live on the 15th of June. So if you are watching it at 5 p.m, please do join us on Twitter. You can search for the hashtag PRiSM Future Music, and we'll be here if you want to chat to us about the program. I'm really excited today because I'm introducing some brand new works by 3 really exciting young PRiSM and RNCM compositional students. So we have with us Fraz, Ellen Sargen and Bofan, who've all written new works for the Future Music Festival. So I suppose I should say a little bit about what we had planned to do. We had asked these 3 composers to compose new works for live performance. They've been mentored by Jennifer Walshe, and each of them have written a new piece for themselves to perform. So it was going to be a composer-performer project. And obviously we were going to be presenting that live as a concert in the RNCM, but due to unforeseen circumstances, we haven't been able to do that, and we've shifted to doing it in this manner instead. So I guess my first question to all of you is, how has shifting from the live performance kind of paradigm for the presentation of your work to this kind of online mode of delivery and communication, how has that influenced your thought when developing these pieces? Has it been an easy thing to do, a natural thing? Has it meant ripping up your plans and starting again? Like how has it been?
I changed a lot of my piece from the original plan, but I think I tried to stay to continue a few of the themes, so just like broad things to do with the relationship between pre-recorded material, whatever that means now, and live material. So just kind of engaging with the idea of synchronization rather than specifically live, just try to translate it.
Brilliant, yeah, thanks, Fraz. That is interesting, because I guess when we work with media, there is always a relationship between the body on the stage and the body on the screen, or coming back even just through sound, through playback. But now there's no body on the stage, right? It's you and you and you all kind of condensed into this one kind of plane, atemporal plane of existence, really. Yeah. So Ellen, how about you? Like, how did this influence your thought?
For me, I did rip it all up and start again. Not because, well, more just because I wanted to use it as an opportunity to, yeah, really explore, I don't know, this sense of who I was going to be digitally. And yeah, so I wanted to just start afresh and use it for what it was, and use all of the restrictions of lockdown for what they were, and yeah, not pretend anything otherwise, I think.
That's really interesting, yeah. And what had you planned to do originally?
I'd originally planned to, I was still going to have, there were still going to be elements of video, so it would have been me interacting live in that sense with the video. But it was originally going to be, it's actually originally going to be a piece where I was, the video was going to be different, it's completely different yoga pieces, different yoga moves, and then me accompanying on the flute. And it was going to be this sense of, it was going to be about social media and this kind of sense between what's real and what's not. And yeah, so I just completely started again.
That's great, thank you. Bofan, same question.
Yeah, so of course, I think the presentation and the way of delivering of this project has changed a lot since obvious reasons. But I think it's a project I've been wanting to make for years, and I think the core of it is to put myself into it and to put myself at the center of it. So whatever delivery or whatever presentation is. I think as long as this idea is there and myself is projecting something, it's a project. So and I'm really fascinated by this moving to online and home studio thing, because I don't have a fancy setup at my home. So what I decided is to just to embrace all the limitations I have here, and to show everyone how I make it and how it's shaped.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, guys. All really interesting answers and different aspects of what we're all dealing with, I guess. I think, yeah, I mean, technologically, it's surprising what we can do, right, with a phone and just like a laptop, even with iMovie. If I think, you know, because I'm obviously quite old, when I think back to what I was able to do kind of 15 years ago or 20 years ago with a machine, it was really difficult to even think of filming something. It was something, it was like access to technology like that was not something that you had outside of an institution. You certainly couldn't do it at home. And I guess in a sense, we're fortunate that we can work those things into our practice. But one thing that I'm sort of thinking about myself compositionally at the moment is just how do we respond to the situation that we find ourselves in? And I don't mean necessarily writing pieces for to be disseminated on the internet. I mean more kind of like, what kind of pieces do we want to write in the future when we can get together and do things? Is it going to be what we wrote in the past? Is it going to be what we're writing right now, or is it going to be something different, something else that we haven't thought of yet? And I don't know. But I really enjoyed your pieces, all of them. I think they're excellent, and I think they really do highlight something about the situation that we're in. And I find it quite inspiring that you've taken the limitations that you had going into this and made 3 pieces that are all actually really different. You know, like completely different pieces of work. I think that's awesome. And I'm really excited that everyone else is going to get to see them now as well. I think that's cool. So I thought, if it's okay, can we start with you, Fraz? Could you introduce your piece to us?
Sure. So my piece is called Sync Outside the Box. And I suppose the title kind of gives away a bit about what it's about, which is 2 things, mainly the idea of synchronization and the idea of these boxes that we're seeing so much of, like what we're getting at the moment, whether that's the Zoom kind of 4-square grid or, you know, multi-tracked orchestras. So I kind of responded to the idea of that grid and just tried to expand it a little bit and think about what the boundaries between the boxes are actually containing, because I think that's perhaps a very interesting area, because everything is outside of these little boxes. So yeah, I suppose that's what my piece is about, the boxes and synchronization.
Wow, so that was fantastic. Thanks, Fraz. Who has a question for Fraz?
Oh, don't know what to ask first. It's so great to see how it's come together. Yeah, and how it's developed throughout the process. I guess something I was wondering is if you could talk a bit about, you know, your decision to use junk percussion and where the technology came in. Like, how much of that was kind of things you were exploring and you found, and then how much was pre-planned, and what kind of, just whether you could talk about that process.
Sure. So as a percussionist, I kind of started from the point of not really having any instruments here. So I didn't have much choice other than to make them myself, or use things. So I basically wanted to find 3 different palettes, I suppose. So I've got the wooden boxes, and then the plastic bucket-y things, and the egg boxes, and the milk thing. So which I basically spent a day wandering around with a couple of drumsticks, hitting things around the house. It's probably really annoying for everyone, but I used those sounds for a lot of it, and hopefully kind of set up certain sounds, and then had bits where a different sound would happen than the one that's being shown. And then I wanted to slightly re-engage with the idea of the actual percussion sounds. So there's a couple of, well, there's one moment where there's drum kit sound effects which are happening while I'm playing not drums. So I suppose it was a lot of just exploration. Everything in this piece, everything was just ideas that I sort of tried, and I was like, oh, I wonder how that sounds, I have no idea, and just kind of put it together in the editing process mostly. Yeah, does that answer that?
I loved I just loved the babies in the jar, in the glass. That was...
Yeah, I was given the babies as a present from my brother for finishing my dissertation a few weeks ago, so I thought I'd use them.
Sorry, Bofan, I interrupted you. Did you have a
No,
question?
sorry, I interrupt you. Yeah, fabulous. That was a really, really good piece. I really enjoyed watching that. I mean, I think I had a similar question as Ellen. First of all, I found those babies really bizarre. And by bizarre, I mean very good. I'm more wondering about the camera work throughout the piece, with you playing different instruments, but without your face showing. And I was wondering if you can explain a bit more about that.
I think it's partly a couple of reasons. So I wanted to have a different angle for each of the 4 screens. And in some ways, just by not having my face, it's easier to include all of the things on the screen and have them all be similar to each other. Because I think there's much more variety that can be shown in a face than in a hand, for example. So that was part of the reason. I toyed with different angles. There's a couple of moments where angles that aren't the normal 4 happen, but yeah, I just thought that I would make it more about the space than about me as the person in the space. I think that's why I decided not to have my face in it.
I think that comes across so well. Sorry,
yeah.
Bofan.
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely adds something to the baby moment when it actually happens, and you really don't expect that to happen because you don't see any face before that. Yeah, well done.
I just had a simple question about the kind of arc of the piece, because I think it has a really strong arc or narrative element. How did you consider the overall shape and I guess the progression of the development of space within the piece, I suppose? because to me it started quite literal, and things are synchronized. Then there's this moment where it moves towards entropy and it becomes more textural. Then it becomes really environmental. You're overlaying things. You start to kind of overlay them digitally and then actually physically with projection. There's just like lots of motion in that idea of how the space develops, and I was just wondering how did you conceive of that while you're writing the piece?
Yeah, I suppose not too distantly from how you actually described it. I kind of just thought of it in terms of I wanted it to be quite a gradual opening from something very obvious what's happening, and then just becoming a little bit less, I suppose, expected or predictable. So it's after halfway through that the video introduces the footage of the rainstorm, which I just wanted to have a moment that was different to this, like, kind of this white space that's everywhere. And then by projecting onto the space that I was in, I kind of, I think of it as just different ways of interacting with the space. But yeah, I think broadly the trajectory kind of moves from something very obvious, very simple, one screen, to 30 odd screens or little bits of footage, and with the little moments of the babies in the wine glass and the rainstorm that just slightly change what you expect the piece to have been talking about from the beginning, I think.
Bofan, could we move on to your piece, please? Would that be okay?
Sure.
Yeah, so introduce the piece and the concept. That'd be great, and then we'll watch it.
Sure. I just yeah, I'm just not sure where to start. So the piece is called #outtakes. It's a series of pieces with hashtags as their titles. And what I fascinated about hashtag is that it often associated with political propaganda and sort of movements within the social sphere, and it simultaneously enables the kind of polarized opinions on whatever follows it. So this piece is about a kind of weird self-exploration into who the self is and where the self is positioned, and it's like a constant investigation into the inside and outside, and the sort of uncanniness of being confined within the square. And I'm very hyper aware that you can see me exactly from the same angle as was shown in the video. And I think that's really fascinating, and it's really a good limitation. And yeah, since limitation of internet and also technical constraint, the image quality isn't really good, and I really want to embrace that as well. So yeah, I hope that explains things.
Great, yeah, thank you very much. Let's have a look at it.
So where should I look at?
There are little trees outside my house. Well, I think about it, it's quite interesting. That's fucking scary. I don't know how there's so many spider webs outside my house. That makes me jump. Like the audio here. I don't know if you can hear that. I don't know how to get rid of them. In the meantime, I feel like there's like an ecosystem within my house. There's an echo channel. Which is quite obvious.
Great. Wow, that was great. Thank you, Bofan. Who has a question for Bofan?
I'll start. I thought that was really cool. It was really exciting to see how you've like taken it from when we were talking first about it, whenever it was. I suppose I will ask you about the chicken. In a way, which is, did you have a sort of character in mind for it, or for your? Were you trying to suggest something with the chicken, or does the chicken just exist as another kind of version of you? I found it very interesting watching it because I was kind of thinking, oh, maybe you're the chicken as well. It's quite like an insane kind of loads and loads of you in like one room, and you can just imagine that the chicken is also just another of you as well. I don't know if there's a particular thing that you're implying, or it's just fun. It's quite an open question.
Yeah, that's the question most people will have after watching it. Yeah, I think that's a very good question to ask, and I actually don't know how to answer this, but I do think the chicken definitely pose the discussion about what is a neutral and what is to be neutral, since it's born with its mouth open like that, and I think that's a neutral phase in that, and we don't think it's neutral, or we think they or it represents something because it doesn't look like it is. But is it really true? So I think that's the whole piece is about what is real and what's not real, and what is in there and what's out there. Yeah, and by juxtaposing it with myself, I think that can say a lot of things without saying them.
For sure.
Does the idea of what's real, what's not real, also extend to how you said this piece was about yourself? Does that also extend to that? And did it being digital afford you something different to if you were being live in front of us? I wonder if you could talk about that.
Yeah, I think the general thing about being trapped at home, or being confined at home without being able to meeting people, is that even if you are confined within a very small corner, like my studio space was really small and really tight, which I do love, you are thrown at various or really overwhelmingly large amount of information and you all the time, and normally those informations are contradictory to themselves. So what to accept and what to not is a big question, and that's something I want to throw here. like whether my face, one of my faces is genuine and the others are not, is a question. And I think that's a question that doesn't need to be answered somehow. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think the question I had was related to Ellen's question actually, which was that for me the trajectory of this piece is at first it feels like it's about time in a sense, because it's this lived repetition where we see lots of versions of the same thing that are all obviously different times, you know. So there's something interesting about that. And then the piece, obviously, there's so much going on in there. It's really complex, which I love. But towards the end, I got the sense that we'd moved into like this almost like digital mediation of you. Like we'd gone out of the room, even though we're still in the room, and we're dealing with all these versions of you. And for me, the symmetry, the mirror thing, I thought was really interesting, because it's about like, my reading of it was that it's about beauty and how we project ourselves via technology, because all of those face fixes and you know, like the idea that the symmetry of the face is crucial to beauty, and yet we can see that this is something that you're doing, so it's not completely flawless, you know. It's interesting. It's a very interesting but I wondered if, other than my kind of rambling associations, was there like an arc to the piece in that sense, that you can describe? Like, how were you thinking about the trajectory of the work?
Sorry, I lost a part of the question. Are you asking the structure?
Yeah, like how do you think of the structure?
Sure. Yeah, I think the structure was most problematic part of the whole planning. And I think both Ellen and Fraz know my struggle from very start. So I think the general trajectory of the whole piece is to have a, what's the word? Journey from the real to the unreal, or vice versa. I don't know which one is true. And it's from the kind of open to super claustrophobic, which is the online environment we are in now, and being thrown at loads of information at once. And by quoting my chicken's face, it's you want to scream, and I want to enact that kind of journey. And I think it worked because over the past few days after getting into the edit, I found myself just really crazy about everything that I've seen, and it's like I can't see myself on the screen anymore. And also I don't believe, or I don't tend to believe which one of myself on screen is the real me. And I think that's a really fascinating experience.
Yes, that's really interesting. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. So Ellen,
Thanks, guys.
Can we move on to your piece? Is that okay?
Yeah, sure. So my piece is called As in Mirrors, and it came from a place where I was really interested in this idea of performative identity and the relationship we have with our instrument and our bodies. And I've been exploring this with other performers as well, but it was a good opportunity here to apply that to myself. So I think the piece sits somewhere between kind of performing this other identity, this digital identity, as well as something a lot more personal. I've kind of conceived of it as an ASMR remix. So throughout the piece, I explore lots of different sounds inside the flute. And over this piece, this becomes a lot more intimate because I close the environment. So because the microphone's in the flute, it starts off with all the keys open, so it's a more open listening environment, and then it becomes closed, so it's a lot more intimate for the listener. But as well as that, the piece, I think, well, it comments on what I feel when I play the flute. which is yeah, this kind of weird relationship between, well, you'll see in the piece, but it documents me exploring this and exploring this relationship with it. And sometimes this kind of appears as diary entries of me having explored this over the past few months. Sometimes it appears as a footage of me actually doing this, and sometimes it appears as like these abstract images of how I feel when I'm playing. So yeah, that's kind of what it's about.
Great, thank you. And this is, as it's an ASMR remix, it's headphones are encouraged for this, right?
Yes, they are, yeah.
Okay. So viewers, pop your headphones on. Have a look.
We stole some time together, hid from everyone else, played with secrets. You filled with breath and sweat, and I was quite pleased with what we made. I was careless at times and hit you into the stand. You never complained, apart from the one time when you seemed to fall apart in my hands.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ellen. So who has a question?
I'll start. And I think it's weirdly nostalgic. I don't know why, but it's super what's the word? Yeah, moving in a way. Oh, I think my question is about the structure and what's behind the decision of making it so segmented.
That was actually a decision I came to relatively late in a way. I was struggling with this because it's on that kind of weird boundary between ASMR and then obviously not. And because it was trying to be both things, yeah, the structure was something I was really struggling with. And I found that making it, by kind of structuring it in terms of ASMR, in terms of the different sounds you hear and literally numbering them, it gave me moments where I could literally flip the relationship between those two things, and it was quite simple, but it helped me do that in a way that I don't think complicated things too much.
And is there anything behind how many segments are there?
No, I just felt that those 10 things were, I don't know, just filled the right amount of time for what I wanted to do, and allowed enough time actually in each sound as well, so you can really get to know it and you can keep that relationship with it as well. Listen to the detail.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks.
I have a question about the sort of position of the listener, I think, because I find it really interesting, and I think it sort of shifts throughout the piece. So obviously we're always hearing very, very close sounds in the ASMR kind of way, but I think what I find interesting is the fact that you're talking, sometimes sort of addressing the listener and sometimes talking about yourself and sometimes talking to the flute. But as the piece went on, I found myself very aware that like my ears in a way were sort of are inside the flute. So there's a kind of blurring between the position of the listener and the flute itself. And then right at the very end, it seems like when you have the camera pointing, you know, showing us, like we're looking down the lens, it kind of seems like a very important and intended thing. I don't know if you could talk a bit more about that.
Yeah, I think well, there's this whole idea that because it's about how I feel, but really it's when I play, but it's really about how I feel about other people looking, about what they see. So that's kind of where the idea to use that footage of the camera came in. But then in terms of putting the microphone in the flute, I think, yeah, I wanted to get kind of a bit uncomfortably close to you as a listener, but I don't know, I was talking to a poet in January, and we kind of explored, we were talking about this very same subject, and we kind of talked about the poem. She wrote a poem based, and it's from the flute's perspective, and so it's kind of I think it came from there, but also, I don't know, it was many things. It was also the technology I have here. What was most effective was to put the microphone in the flute. And it just all sprung from there, and it created, you know, meaning where I hadn't originally even intended it, and then suddenly realizing that I could play off that a lot more. That's, yeah, the whole process was like that, actually. It's kind of looking back at what I'd filmed, and then seeing, oh, that makes that happen, and that. So yeah, it was a new way of working for me, actually.
I thought it was really effective.
I thought it was really.
Would you think?
Oh, sorry, Bofan.
Sorry, Sam.
Please.
Right. Sorry. Yeah, I think I'm just wondering if, just out of curiosity, if would you say different things to the flute or about yourself if it's on different flute or different kind of flute?
No, I actually would say the same thing. I think sometimes, in a way, even playing the bass flute makes me feel more these things because it's so big, and it then makes me look even, I don't know, smaller, I guess. No, it's just something and it's only over the last few years I've kind of really even, it's not a problem, it's just something that's, because I'm doing this PhD and thinking about this all the time, it's kind of come to light.
The question that I had about your piece, the thing that I really thought was beautiful was that point midway through where the relationship between what we're hearing and seeing, it breaks down, actually, and we start to kind of see completely different events to the events that we're hearing in the music itself. And it struck me that in ASMR videos that actually never happens, right? Because that's not the function of ASMR. And I think that's really, really interesting. And I really liked it, but I wondered what was your thinking behind that kind of shift? Because it seems structurally really important.
Yeah, I guess, again, it was a way for me to get from, well, not get, but to mix ASMR in with this whole other world that I was trying to create. And I knew I wanted to have that image of me kind of bashing the keys. I knew I wanted that against an image that was incredibly gentle, because I think it said something about, I don't know, on some level what I'd been trying to do with my own relationship with the flute. And I think once I did that, once I changed that relationship visually, it then, yeah, it allowed me to keep changing the relationship visually, and yeah, keep, not extremely, but just breaking it apart in little ways so that I had room to move other things in. And yeah, that's where it came from, really.
Great, yeah. And I guess just a small follow-on question, how important is it that the things that you say that we don't hear, how important is it that those things remain unheard but are sort of said, if that makes sense?
Yeah, quite important. It's probably, yeah, it was a really interesting exercise, actually, in what I was willing to share and what I wasn't willing to share. And I had to, at the beginning, you hear one of these diaries that I talk about. And even that, I had to pick a very specific bit of the diary because there's other things in there that I wasn't willing to share. But I like the viewer to know that there's things there that haven't been said, and I don't know, maybe one day I'll say them. But for now, this is what I wanted to share, and yeah, I guess I'll see where that takes me down, what road that takes me down in the future.
Great, yeah. No, thank you very much, and thank you all. This is really, really interesting, and I think the pieces are all super strong, and as I said at the start, really different. I couldn't. There's each has a moment within it where we kind of have that similar relationship, like the trust between what we're hearing and what we're seeing kind of breaks. I think for you, Fraz, in your piece, it's the drumming. You know, well, actually, before that, it's the storm and then the drumming. We sort of for a second something happens, and all of a sudden that relationship that you built up gets kind of a little twist. And the same for you, Bofan, as well in your piece with well, in lots of ways actually in your piece, but the mouthing of the chicken, you know, is like the thing that sticks in my mind as like a relationship between what we're seeing and what we're hearing being super interesting and complicated. And again, in your piece, Ellen, as we were just discussing, so there's lots. It's really interesting to me that that's a commonality, and technically there's a lot of kind of commonalities, but artistically, conceptually, and in terms of the material, they're all very, very different pieces. And I think that's great. They all kind of fit together, and yet they're very different. And I really enjoyed getting to hear more about them. So thank you very much for joining me today, and thank you to anyone out there who's watching this. We have a lot of other events taking place over the day, so please feel free to join us for something else. And if you want to find out more about PRiSM or future music, you can find that information on the RNCM website. So thanks again, everyone, and I'll see you soon, I hope. In person, maybe, who knows? Yeah.
Maybe. Thanks very much, Sam.
Thank you.
Take care.